Nobody can ever trouble an honest journalist. Nobody can ever trouble an honest media house. We are destined for success. Every moment from now on, I want everyone in the Digvijay newsroom to always remember that you must be wedded to the cause of news. Thank you very much, Arnab, for having us here and for letting us take the journey forward.
Very excited of what we are going to show our viewers. Very different way of telling the viewers that this is what the national capital looks like and this is what we are going to show the entire world. We've come a long way.
PM says Vikas bhi or Virasat bhi. With the latest technology and yet remain glued to your roots is what we have tried to do.
People of this country know that whichever language we go to, we are speaking for the people 24/7. We are truly the voice of the people. Today we dedicate Republic Kannada to the people of Karnataka. I am totally confident that the people of Karnataka will welcome us and accept us, give us their blessings in this journey. Nobody can ever trouble an honest journalist. Nobody can ever trouble an honest media house. We are destined for success. Every moment from now on, I want everyone in the Digvijay newsroom to always remember that you must be wedded to the cause of news. Thank you very much, Arnab, for having us here and for letting us.
Motorola, India's best 5G smartphone brand.
And I have enormous respect for Modi ji, and he's been personally very warm and kind to me, and we're working very hard, as I said, on our shared ambition of concluding an ambitious and comprehensive trade deal between India and the UK, because both of us think that would be a good thing, and both of us need to make sure it works for our two countries.
Amity has been ranked India's #1 not-for-profit private university for 11th year, with top 10 ranked institutions in management, engineering, biotech, law, masscom, telecom, hospitality, fashion and more. Yet another top ranking for Amity University.
Very excited of what we are going to show our viewers. Very different way of telling the viewers that this is what the national capital looks like and this is what we are going to show the entire world. We've come a long way.
PM says Vikas bhi or Virasat bhi. With the latest technology and yet remain glued to your roots is what we have tried to do.
People of this country know that whichever language we go to, we are speaking for the people 24/7. We are truly the voice of the people. Today we dedicate Republic Kannada to the people of Karnataka. I am totally confident that the people of Karnataka will welcome us and accept us, give us their blessings in this journey.
2017 Republic TV. 2019 Republic Bharat. 2021 Republic Bangla. 2023 Republic Kannada, coming soon on India's largest news network. Very excited of what we are going to show our viewers. Very different way of telling the viewers that this is what the national capital looks like, and this is what we are going to show the entire world. We've come a long, long way.
PM says Vikas bhi or Virasat bhi. With the latest technology and yet remain glued to your roots is what we have tried to do.
People of this country know that whichever language we go to, we are speaking for the people 24/7. We are truly the voice of the people. Today we dedicate Republic Kannada to the people of Karnataka. I am totally confident that the people of Karnataka will welcome us and accept us, give us their blessings in this journey.
From the Delhi studios of Republic TV, it's time for Arnab Goswami on the debate.
Arnab Goswami on the debate at 10, powered by Reva University, Quick Heal, Secure Right, Green Lamb Laminates, PolicyBazaar.com, and Cucina, co-powered by Mankind Pharma and Tata Punch.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, and now time for the nation's sharpest opinion. And the reality is, whether some opposition parties like it or not here in India, but the fact is that Xi Jinping is extremely upset over the fact that India is today a leader of the global south. And that is why he has made a frustrated attempt to try and diminish the G20 event by not attending it. Reality is there is much to celebrate about India's presidency of the G20. Most importantly, I think we brought the global south together, which was very significant. We brought together Latin American countries, Caribbean countries, 47 African countries, 31 Asian countries, 11 Oceania countries, 7 European countries. And we're all doing this at a time when our significance is across the world quite great, with about 8% growth this quarter. I think one of the most important things during our presidency has been that we have used our diplomatic might and this position to get the African Union to become a full member of the G20. And in fact, it was under India's presidency of the G20 that the historic digital economy ministers meeting was held, under which there was a consensus among the G20 nations to create what is being called a global economic game changer, the digital public infrastructure, or DPIs, in which we are already a global leader. Ladies and gentlemen, I can go on and on, but fundamentally, I think this is also the high point,
And if some people are saying that the government is using the G20 to position, before the elections, that's their way of looking at it. The reality is that largely this has been a very, very successful event. There is no reason for India to play it down. This is a huge congregation of global leadership that is here in the national capital over the weekend. And this is not the first time we've hosted a multilateral conference like this. We've hosted many multilateral conferences in the past. But the fact is, this is by far the biggest and the most significant, both in terms of its stature and its timing. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a global debate. Let's go in straight for that.
A grand Bharat Mandapam awaiting global delegations. A mini India for the world to witness. A taste of India for the global palate. But behind the glamour of the G20 celebrations is the real hard work of Team India to make its presidency a grand success.
200 meetings over 50 cities, a G20 like no other. As the Prime Minister says, that this G20 is going to be action-oriented and decisive. India is now becoming the voice of those who were largely unrepresented in most of the groupings. Not just that, as far as this G20 is concerned, India has also been very successful in negotiating and also embracing a G20 foreign ministers' outcome document.
One of the biggest achievements is the possible inclusion of African Union.
As far as AU is concerned, let me say that the Prime Minister, who's a great believer in Global South, had written to all the leaders and there has been a very positive response, but formally that will come before the summit.
The biggest challenge in this year-long presidency has been the shadow of the Ukraine war, as most of the meetings ended without a joint communique. But it seems India has navigated the polarized world to find a balance.
And our focus is, as Sherpa said earlier, to drive a consensus on priorities of the G20, how to structure in the priorities and interests of the Global South into the G20 discussions, and how to bring together the leaders of the G20 and the leaders of the invited guest countries around that particular agenda.
The world is looking at India for solutions on key issues. And in the next 2 days, India will chart a new global course. Let's debate.
Great panel to look ahead to the G20 this weekend. I'm joined by Peter Kuznick, Director of the Nuclear Studies Institute and Professor of History at American University in Washington. I have with us visiting fellow at the Hudson Institute in Tokyo, Japan, Dr. Satoru Nagao, Fred Wire, Senior Journalist from Moscow, Elizabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute in London, Rich Outzen, former Senior Advisor at the State Department and Senior Fellow at the Jamestown Foundation. He's joining us from Virginia. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, former Secretary MEA, now works in Washington as an International Strategic Advisor. Brahma Chelani, Professor of Strategic Studies at the Center for Policy Research and Fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin. And I'd like to start by asking Ambassador G. Parthasarathy, one of India's leading diplomats and former High Commissioner to Pakistan. Ambassador Parthasarathy, I'd like to begin with you. Just want a perspective on it. We have a lot of leaders landing now. There's a lot of, this is going to be the big global story next 48 hours. What, in your view, can be the big takeaway from this event beyond, the ceremonial aspect of it? It can't just be a ritual of all the leaders coming to New Delhi for 2 days. It's got to be more than that. What can that be?
I think, look, as far as I'm concerned, the major achievement I see is that G20 was looked on by the rest of the world, especially the developing countries, as an organization of the rich. There was never really a serious attempt to look at most crucial problems, especially climate change, from the point of view of poor developing countries. And it's really, especially in Africa, made people very despondent as to what is this world order all about. These 20 guys, most of whom very rich, get together and don't look at our problems. So I think what we have looked at this time is that basically on climate change. It doesn't matter if you're the United States or if you're Somalia. Climate change is going to hit you both. And therefore, this is the first step, as I see it, for a unified approach for a better world in the future. Of course, there have been other discussions about the World Bank, international funding institutions, credits, how we find developmental finance. Fine. So I think that is most important. Of course, it's been clouded by the Sino-Russia-American rivalry, not just over Ukraine, but in general. But India wants to be a part at looking at this in positive terms. And looking at it in positive terms, there are two issues you can't forget: environment and development. It's going to afflict us all. And I think what has happened, I'm very pleased. One only hopes that this is followed up with expanding international monetary organizations like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, so that we move together as one humanity. Not just the rich guys saying that I shall deliver on what financial policies will be, on what budget deficits will be. Let's sit together as human beings and get a good organization, and bringing in such high importance to both climate change and developing countries. I'm glad African Union has been admitted. I think what India has done is not a narrow service for itself or for its neighborhood, but taking into account the needs also of the developed world. We are bringing in large people who were left out of this, any substantial activity of the G20, into a focus primarily starting with climate change.
Well, thank you for your introductory remarks, Professor Peter Kuznick. How much will Xi Jinping's decision not to attend the G20 in New Delhi cast a shadow on what's going to happen here next 48 hours?
I don't think that will necessarily pose a problem, the fact that Putin and Xi Jinping are not attending, because the United States goes there with a specific agenda. And Biden hoped he could take advantage of the fact that Putin and Xi weren't there in order to rally the G20 to support the U.S. position. I think that that's in many ways a fool's errand. The world is not looking for further division right now. What Modi is proposing, what the summit represents, is the world coming together as one global community. So the attempts to divide it over Ukraine, over the South China Sea, I don't think are going to succeed. But Modi is faced with an almost impossible task now, given how divided the world is. And also the other meeting that took place last month, the BRICS meeting, in many ways represents an alternative to what the U.S. is proposing. What Blinken and Sullivan and Biden have been saying is that they want to bolster the World Bank, they want to bolster the IMF, but the world is looking instead to other alternatives. The BRICS represents that. China's Belt and Road Initiative represents that. So the question is, as the first speaker was saying so wisely, can we come together around the world's real needs? dealing with climate change, dealing with the nuclear threat. It's fascinating to me that the movie Oppenheimer is doing so well around the world because it's such a strongly anti-nuclear movie. So what we're talking about is international development, eliminating poverty, dealing with climate change, dealing with the nuclear threat, dealing with war. And if to any extent to which this summit can advance that agenda, it will be in the interest of all mankind.
Well, absolutely. But what's going to be the sharp takeaway in your view? Let me take that to Dr. Satoru Nagao. There has to be a sharp takeaway. Is it too much to expect? Is it too much to expect any one single sharp takeaway which can be historic from New Delhi?
This is historic, so that's why we do not need to say we expect too much. Because G20 is real representative of the world. Compare with the BRICS, compare with the SCO, these multinational framework do not include the G7 side. So that's why China and Russia make the BRICS or SCO to be the anti-Western multinational framework. But in case of the G20, G20 include both G7 and global South countries, which covers 85% of the total GDP of the world. That's why G20 is really representative of the current world. That's why India's leadership is very important. India's leadership show in the real representative of the multinational framework. That's why, of course, we expect very big, very high. That's true, but at the same time, we do not need to underestimate the result of the G20. This is very important, and India will show how great India is. Thank you.
And is it possible? Is it possible that from New Delhi there can be a call, perhaps Brahmachalani, in the context of the Ukraine conflict, that would have a long-reaching impact? Xi Jinping is not here, but his number 2 is here. You got Sergei Lavrov also here.
Well, if there's any country that can play the role of a broker, of a bridge builder, it is India. India is as neutral as any country can be. It is trying to build bridges. It's trying to narrow the global divides. It's a tightrope for India, given the fact that the geopolitical wrangling has become sharper over the last year and a half or so. Still, when we think about what this summit is going to achieve, I think the entry of the African Union into what has been so far a Western-dominated institution will be seen as an accomplishment, because G20 has not only the countries from Europe and North America, it also has the Western bloc's allies like South Korea, Japan, and Australia. So it's a largely Western-dominated organization. So bringing the African Union into it, given the fact that the European Union is already a permanent member of the G20, would be seen as a balancing act. Also, it will enhance India's credentials as a leader of the global South. But talking about the Chinese premier being here instead of the Chinese president, we should remember that until a few years ago, until Modi was elected the prime minister, India was having bilateral summits with China at the level of the Chinese premier being head of the Chinese delegation. When Manmohan Singh was the prime minister, when he visited Beijing, or the Chinese premier came here, these were bilateral summit meetings, not with the real decision maker. The present premier of China is merely the secretary of President Xi Jinping. And now look at the irony of it. The Chinese premier is in New Delhi. Modi isn't even holding a bilateral meeting with him. That shows how India's China policy has been transformed in the last 9 years. But there is a more serious and worrying aspect to the India-China equation, which is that, as we have seen from Xi Jinping's decision not to attend the New Delhi summit, that in the run-up to this G20 summit, efforts were made, talks were held, both at the military level as well as at the diplomatic level, to find ways to diffuse what is an increasingly dangerous military standoff between China and India. For the last 41 months, tens of thousands of Chinese and Indian troops are facing off along the entire Himalayan frontier from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh. These talks tentatively reached a broad understanding to diffuse the military crisis, the border crisis, in a gradual manner. But at the political level, Xi Jinping's regime recoiled from concluding a deal with India, signaling that there is no place for diplomacy and for dialogue in the China-India relationship. That's a very sobering message, a somber message that China has delivered to New Delhi. This is a message that India needs to consider and contemplate what its options are. If there is no place for dialogue and diplomacy in the relationship with China, if this military crisis that China has created through land grabs in Ladakh is to continue, China's aim is to make this border with India a perennially hot border. India has to very carefully consider its options, given the fact that Xi Jinping is itching to attack Taiwan. If there is a Chinese attack on Taiwan, it will open up an opportunity for India to settle the Himalayan frontier. But India has to prepare now. India has to have strategic clarity. The fact is that China is going to become increasingly a major problem for India, for the United States, and for much of the world.
Well, I think you put it well, at least in the last part of what you said. And taking off from that, Rich, Outson, and Fred Wire, I'd like to draw you in, along with Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, please. I'm just trying to get a first round with everyone. Do you think, this Xi Jinping's absence, I'm not calling it a boycott, absence from the New Delhi G20 is a message, and it comes days after 9 countries have rejected, their expansionist map, which challenges the territorial sovereignty of several major countries in the region. There is an ongoing military dispute, border dispute between India and China. But there is also this sense, Rich, that China is itching. Xi Jinping is under pressure from the elders. And he has his eyes on Taiwan. There is an American election coming in. Some Americans, presidential candidates are even saying that they'd rather have China take over Taiwan and build semiconductor facilities or bases somewhere else. These are realities, Rich. I mean, do you think there is the shadow of Taiwan over this G20 as a possible reality? Isn't that going to be uppermost in everyone's minds besides Ukraine?
Mm-hmm. And it should be. Arnab, it's good to be with you. It's a little ironic that India and the other countries of the G20 that have played a very high-minded and very creative role in trying to rectify imbalances in poverty and wealth in the globe and pulling the global south out of the economic straits there and appealing to the rich countries to do more for a just world order can in some cases be faced with pressure to not speak out about injustices that are not economic in nature. In this case, militarism and overt aggression by Russia and by China. It is no mistake that they published, that the Chinese published a very aggressive map that affects India through claiming regions like Aksai Chin, Arunachal Pradesh, and the Doklam Plateau, as well as the Taiwan Straits. China is sending a message, and that is that we have our own club, it's the BRICS, and we are not concerned about your concerns over sovereignty. And Ukraine On the other hand, with Russia is the same deal, because by not adopting a position, the G20 and the global South with it are missing an opportunity to say that both sides, both types of injustice matter, economic injustice and the naked aggression that's going on here. So, yeah, I read what Russia and China's top leadership is sending as a very clear message about don't mess with our sorts of injustice while you are struggling with economic injustice.
Yes, but you know, will this, one of the biggest questions, Fred, that's coming about this G20 summit is whether this summit will end without a joint statement. And while there is a lot of the Western media doubting it, is there going to be a New Delhi declaration, despite Russia and China opposing it? Will that be India's biggest achievement? Can there still be a New Delhi declaration? If there's a New Delhi declaration of the G20 at a time like this, I think that's going to be an incredible achievement for India's presidency and for the G20 itself. Fred.
Yes, well, I think the absence of those two leaders, I'm not a China expert, but in the case of Russia, probably does indicate that they want to avoid a confrontation over their issues. It may indicate, as the previous speaker said, that they are shifting their priorities to other groups that are more amenable, like the BRICS or the SCO. And probably a lot of these things, like the China-India border dispute, are not really items to be dealt with at the G20. And the Ukraine war, I think many countries feel, is also not an issue that the G20 can settle. There are so many other things, global issues, climate, development, the financial crisis, the food crisis. There are just so many international issues where, in general, you could find agreement, even between Russia and the United States, in principle, how to go forward, never mind the countries of the global South. But the Ukraine war isn't going to be one of them. You will have nothing but division over that. So probably there won't be a final declaration that covers the Ukraine war. Which isn't to say that India doesn't have a very positive role to play in if peace ever comes on the table. I think one of the natural countries to mediate would be India, but it probably wouldn't do so at a table where Joe Biden is present. You will have other formats for that. So probably it's for the best that President Putin isn't there. Anything that he would have to say, I guess Sergei Lavrov can say for him. But in general, I think that from what I read in the Russian media, they're really pleased that India is chairing this summit of the G20. They're in general pleased with the role India plays in the world and the sort of neutral or non-aligned stance that it's taken on the Ukraine war and its efforts to focus on other critical issues of global concern.
Yes, but it's important to hold on to the low-hanging fruit, Elizabeth and Pradeep Kapoor. Elizabeth, what could those low-hanging fruits be if Ukraine's not on the agenda? If you're going to avoid the hard issues out here, if there's not going to be a joint statement on that, what are the low-hanging fruit that can be achieved in a New Delhi declaration? Elizabeth.
Yes, you're definitely right, Anna. Ukraine is not low-hanging fruit, and we can't expect Ukraine to be part of any any final communique. But if we look at what G20 is about, it's primarily about the globalized economy, or the way countries deal with each other in economic terms. And there's a lot that can be done there, or at least that can be said in this instance, because the globalized economy is at a juncture. We have been operating according to one set of rules, which has turned out not to work very well. And now is the question, how do we set ourselves up differently? And as your viewers will know, Arnab, the biggest concern many countries have is with China's constant subversion and violation of international rules as set out by the World Trade Organization, for example. And so the question is, how can we arrange the globalized economy differently? How can the countries in New Delhi at the moment, represented by the heads of government and some others, how can they, what sort of agreement can they reach that will satisfy everybody, at least a lowest common denominator? And what is that lowest common denominator? And that's why it's good that the summit is taking place in India, because India is actually one of the winners of this refashioning of the globalized economy, because so many companies and so many countries have been disappointed with China. But the question is, how do we set ourselves up? The World Trade Organization alone is not sufficient, and so this is a forum that could at least agree on certain rules or ambitions, and we can work from there.
Yes, this is also Prime Minister Narendra Modi's big moment, isn't it, Ambassador Gupta? It is his big moment, and obviously Xi Jinping, has this ongoing rivalry with Narendra Modi. It was quite evident, because I think India did reach out. There was a meeting between Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping on the sidelines, even if it was sort of a pull aside, but there was a meeting at the BRICS summit. So India has tried to do everything, but Xi wants to play spoilsport. So my question to you is, we keep coming back to China. China is not there. America wants to take advantage. Does this make the G20 a more robust gathering, or does this diminish the G20? Can you unmute yourself, sir, please? Can't hear you.
I have had the opportunity to thank you for hosting this discussion, Arnab, I was saying. And I just want to say that having dealt with China and the Chinese interventions on many occasions in my past, after past postings as ambassador in different countries or as a senior diplomat, the track record is not something of which any country can be proud of. In the sense that even when the first ASEAN-India summit was taking place in Cambodia, and Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee was to come there, on innumerable occasions, China tried to play the spoil sport by throwing a spanner into the works. It didn't succeed, fortunately, because Cambodia was very clear about what it wanted out of the ASEAN-India summit. The ASEAN countries were very clear, but that didn't stop China from trying its worst or hardest to hit at the most vulnerable points. Fortunately, they did not succeed at all. Similarly, we have seen in the UN, whenever there is an effort to blacklist some terrorist or terrorist organization, there is a lot of opposition from China and dragging of its feet under pretexts which are absolutely unacceptable. Even for the India's joining as a permanent member of the Security Council. On so many issues, there have been these very clear-cut instances. I can go on endlessly. So if you have a confirmed track record of a country acting negatively on the border, in diplomatic talks, in multilateral fora, for India to expect much from China is not a good expectation. Even for the nuclear talks in Washington, D.C., it was Bush who finally had to sort of really, push very hard against the Chinese stance for them to buckle under finally. So for the G20, I think there will be a lot more positivity. The atmosphere will be much better without Xi Jinping's negative presence in the capital. Of course, it will take away a little bit from the overall discussions and the conclusions. And the consensus may be possible or may not be possible to arrive at a joint communique, because the Chinese delegation will be continuously in touch with their headquarters in Beijing to ask for directions and instructions and guidance. So it will depend on what they give as guidance and instructions and what other countries are able to push forward on the Chinese to agree to the joint communique. But having said that, on many occasions when I've dealt with these issues...
How important it is a joint communique?
I beg your pardon? So in many countries...
I was asking how important is a joint communique at all?
Well, joint communique is very important because a joint communique by its very definition means a joint communique of all the countries participating. But if there is no joint communique, it makes it a slightly less important document, because the chairman can issue a statement, which is called the chairman's statement, and that itself substitutes the joint communique. But in historic terms, a joint communique has that 1% or a few percent more additional longer shelf life and greater acceptance globally. So a joint communique is important, and that always has to be the first attempt at having a joint communique. Thank you, Arnab.
Yeah, well, I mean, going back to that, the Americans are saying, Ambassador Parthasarathi, that you need to look at issues like debt relief, technology, bank reform, action on the climate crisis. You spoke about climate. That came up more and more. Maybe there can be some substantial agreement here. In fact, we had the India Sherpa through the G20, Amitabh Kant, already say that the draft joint communique is almost ready. He appeared quite bullish about it.
Well, let's put it this way, that the Chinese are going to act as spoil sports. But I think we should be ingenuous enough to go around the issues which are controversial. The issue which is most controversial, of course, is general Chinese behavior, aggressiveness, and so on. So, yes, you can go around it, but focus on the positive. If you produce a document which says these issues were discussed, for example, the China issue and so on, but don't go into any details, and you follow up with another one with full details, then who the party is? He can't object to your skipping over or softening what is issue sensitive to China. I think that's the only way ahead, and I don't think taking the Ukraine situation is going to prove helpful, because it will be very divided, and therefore on the divided issues, go around it while focusing essentially on the issues of absolute human interest, economic growth, the climate change. These are issues which you need to focus on. And areas we are cooperating so much. The multilateral
there's a lot of
focus on the positive.
There's a lot of positioning.
And go around
there's a lot of positioning here.
Go around the negative. Yeah.
Correct. No, there's a lot of position. It's a very, very delicately balanced G20, Professor Peter Kuznick, as you can see, because it's not the Sino-American, China-American issues which are coming up. It's also happening in G20 at a time when there's been some serious pulls and pressures between India and China at a personal and political level, at a government-to-government level. So it becomes almost mandatory for Narendra Modi to have a strong takeaway from this event, because that also means a lot for India's standing on the global stage, doesn't it? And India's role in the future.
Modi has already established himself on the global stage at a time when there's no recognized world leader. For a long time, the United States was the dominant force, but now the United States has been morally and otherwise compromised. You look at the fragility of American democracy. The world sees that. And even in the United States, Biden attends as a compromised president. When he went last year in Indonesia, he had just had a very successful midterm election and seemed to be doing very well. But now, between the economy and the concerns about his age, the fact that 2/3 of the Democrats, his own party voters, say that they want somebody else to run. They think Biden is too old. So he comes there in a weakened position. Modi is wise enough to know that he doesn't want to be part of either camp when it comes to really Ukraine or some of these other issues. So he's a unique figure because he can bridge the divides in a way that certainly Biden or Xi Jinping or Putin cannot at this point. So he can speak for the global South, and he is speaking for the global South. But we have to remember that we live in a world in which the richest 8 people have more wealth than the poorest 4 billion people. We have serious problems. As the ambassador was saying, the climate change is an issue that people are recognizing more and more every day. We look at the floods, we look at the crazy weather, we look at the suffering that's going on. How can we postpone this? So we can agree we're not going to make any headway on the South China Sea. We're not going to make any headway on Ukraine. Modi can try to do that elsewhere. But maybe if we can make some headway on climate change, on economic development, this would be an enormously successful meeting. And those are the issues that we should deal with, I think.
I think that's very important. Yes, I think you put it so well, Peter. Before I take a 30-second commercial break, I just want to say this to all our international viewers, that Prime Minister Narendra Modi goes into a big election, as you all know, 2024. And as of now, very solid chance of him being re-elected as for the 3rd time as Prime Minister of the world's largest democracy and one of the top 3 economies of the world. A point being, viewers, we need to think about this. Putin, Biden and Xi can't together or otherwise see eye to eye. Who's going to give leadership to the world at a personal level otherwise? Will it be Sunak? No. Will it be Macron? Impossible. So the world needs a higher level of mediation. Can that come from India? And no overhyping this, because this is an Indian channel. I'm not overhyping it. I'm going to throw this question to our international panelists when I'm back in 30 seconds.
Amity has been ranked India's #1 not-for-profit private university for 11th year, with top 10 ranked institutions in management, engineering, biotech, law, mass comm, telecom, hospitality, fashion and more. Yet another top ranking for Amity University.
Nobody can ever trouble an honest journalist. Nobody can ever trouble an honest media house. We are destined for success. Every moment from now on, I want everyone.
And I'd like to hear, Rich, you heard my take there. I'd like to hear your take on it. Obviously, there's a domestic political issue also around it. There's a lot of talk here about Narendra Modi, being heads and shoulders over any leader here in India, heading towards a general election. But globally, do you see a role for Prime Minister Modi and for India beyond the G20?
I do. I think that Modi has, Prime Minister Modi has struck an important and balanced position with regards to the division between what the professor was talking about, because climate change and economic development for the global South are actually in tension with one another to a certain degree. Certainly the Western approach to climate change control conflicts to some extent with the development goals of the global South. Now, Modi's been very good about a balanced position on that and speaking for the global South. That's caught the attention of people around the world, and I think he's comported himself well. He's a man who has his own baggage, as all these leaders do, and in the West, certainly with regards to human rights, there's been concerns and criticisms there. But I would agree that with Biden being compromised, as the professor said, and with Xi and Putin essentially bullying many of their neighbors, that Modi's about what the world's got for the leader of one of the biggest countries, who's in a position to strike a more balanced and a more statesman-like position. So yeah, I think this is a time for India to shine. They've shown through the leadership of the G20 over the past year that they're not out to rearrange the world or to revolutionize things, but to really push for progress on some important things. I think it's a unique and a very powerful moment, and I think Modi's doing a pretty good job of seizing it.
Yes, absolutely. You know, the numbers also say so. Elizabeth, I'd like to hear your take on this. This is a very interesting time for India as well. India has become more conscious of its economic and strategic potential. In that context, how do you see India's role, G20 and beyond?
Arnab, there's just one way of summarizing it, which is that India is having a second chance, getting a second chance at establishing itself as a leader in the globalized economy. And that's because China is becoming a country and a market that companies are concerned about. And so they are, as you all know, they are trying to establish operations, reduce operations in China, establish operations elsewhere. And India is a massive winner here. Now, I have to tell you, Arnab, because I work on this, many companies wanted to do this in the 90s when globalization took off in a massive way, and they were concerned about red tape in India, about the lack of organization compared to China. So they went to China. Now India is getting that second chance, and this is a massive opportunity, and it's sort of a nice coincidence that the G20 summit is being held in New Delhi. But the thing to remember, though, Arnab, is that this is not a zero-sum game between leaders, or let's say between leaders other than Xi and Putin. This is an opportunity for leaders and countries other than these two countries to begin to work more closely together, because they can all benefit from it, both economically and indeed when it comes to fighting collective challenges like climate change.
I think India is very realistic about its position nowadays. And part of that realism also is, Brahma, that we don't underplay ourselves. If you've seen the tone of this discussion as well, Elizabeth, it's very, very direct, very transactional. What can we do? What can we not do? You've seen these two very distinguished gentlemen, three gentlemen from India speaking. There's no hype in this. But I think there's an opportunity. Brahma, we'd be amiss to miss this opportunity. This is actually a historic moment. Everything seems to be coming together. And I think China's, the way, the way they've been behaving, rather, isn't going to do them much good. That's my take. I mean, you have clear goals, goals laid out for the G20, but there's been a run up to this. Yes, Elizabeth. I was just saying there's a run up to this. It's not only G20 overall. Yes, Elizabeth, you were saying something.
No, it's not just G20. And if I can just come back to the massive concern in the global business community about doing business in China, that has been building up over the past decade, and it's accelerating, has been accelerating in the past couple of years. And a key moment was when Jack Ma, China's leading businessman, when he didn't think the country was safe enough for him to live in anymore, and he fled to Japan. And so this is not something that companies are doing lightly, reducing operations, trying to reduce operations in China and move operations to countries like India. It's a very complicated process. And if I can just give one piece of advice, Arnab, it is that Vietnam is doing fantastic work to attract companies to Vietnam, and I think this is something that the Indian government can learn from, because there are lots of companies that are, so to speak, up for grabs, and they just need to be encouraged to, more of them need to be encouraged to come to India to join the ones that are already setting themselves up there. And we are talking now about the manufacturing sector. Obviously, the technology sector is already very strong.
What do you think, Brahma?
Well, I agree with Elizabeth. China's dramatic economic slump is increasing the salience of the rise of India, which recently became the first country to land a spacecraft on the moon's south pole. Unlike China, India is not seen as hungry for the land and resources of others, and its rise has not been accompanied by greater assertiveness. As we all know, India is moving to secure what it sees as its rightful place on the world stage. Eschewing explicit strategic alignment with any other great power, India is positioning itself as a champion of the global south. But more broadly, the issue is, will India become a global manufacturing powerhouse, the way China emerged as a global manufacturing powerhouse? China became the world's back factory. India's future trajectory will be determined by how it deals with its challenges. India faces internal and external challenges. And given India's immense size and diversity, India is one of the world's most culturally diverse nations. So India's immense size and diversity underscore its enormous challenges. Today, India under Modi may look stable and resurgent, but its future direction will hinge on continued political stability, rapid economic growth, internal and external security, and a forward-looking foreign policy. And I think, Arnab, next year's election in India, the national election, is going to be critical in determining India's future trajectory.
Yeah. And the whole world is looking at it, Brahma. But this is an interesting combination of circumstances. I think we can relish the moment that as of now, we have more people cheering us on than China, for sure. I can say that. There's going to be a lot of live coverage, ladies and gentlemen, next couple of days and beyond. I thank you very much for that very, very interesting discussion. And viewers, G20 live coverage only and only on Republic. We have the best reporters, best anchors, the best coverage, more live locations, everything coming your way over this weekend. For tonight, good night and goodbye.
Amity has been ranked India's #1 not-for-profit private university for 11th year, with top 10 ranked institutions in management, engineering, biotech, law, masscom, telecom, hospitality, fashion and more. Yet another top ranking for Amity University.
Nobody can ever trouble an honest journalist. Nobody can ever trouble an honest media house. We are destined for success. Every moment from now on, I want everyone in the Digvijay newsroom to always remember that you must be wedded to the cause of news. Thank you very much, Anand, for having us here and for letting us take the journey forward.
...2017 Republic TV. ...2019 Republic Bharat. 2021, Republic Bangla. (2023) Republic Kannada, coming soon on
Motorola, India's best 5G smartphone brand.
And I have enormous respect for Modi ji, and he's been personally very warm and kind to me, and we're working very hard, as I said, on our shared ambition of concluding an ambitious and comprehensive trade deal between India and the UK, because both of us think that would be a good thing, and both of us need to make sure it works for our two countries.
Nobody can ever trouble an honest journalist. Nobody can ever trouble an honest media house. We are destined for success. Every moment from now on, I want everyone in the Digvijay newsroom to always remember that you must be wedded to the cause of news. Thank you very much, Anand, for having us here and for letting us take the journey forward.